The night my husband slid the divorce papers across the kitchen table, I was folding laundry. Not crying, not screaming. Folding laundry. He stood there in the doorway with his arms crossed, watching me like he was waiting for something to explode. A reaction. Tears, maybe. Begging. That's what he expected. I could see it in the way he kept shifting his weight from one foot to the other, like a man bracing for impact. I set down one of his shirts. I was still washing his shirts, still folding them into neat rectangles the way he liked, and I looked at the papers. I want a divorce, Ivy. His name is Brandon. We met when I was 24, married at 26, and I spent the next 7 years slowly disappearing inside a life I didn't recognize anymore. I picked up the papers. I read the first page. Then I set them back down, smoothed at the corner that had curled up, and said, "Okay." He blinked. "Okay, okay," I said again. And then I went back to folding laundry. He didn't know what to do with that. He stood there for another full minute, waiting for me to fall apart. When I didn't, he left the room. And I finished folding every single piece of clothing in that basket, slow and careful, like I had all the time in the world, because I did. I need to back up. Because if I start at that moment, the laundry, the papers, his face, you'll think I was brave. You'll think I was strong, and the truth is, I wasn't brave at all for most of those 7 years. I was scared. I was small. I had shrunk myself down so many times to fit inside his idea of who I should be that I had almost forgotten there was a version of me that took up space. We got married in October. It was a beautiful wedding. His mother cried. My mother cried. I cried, but mine were happy tears. Or at least I told myself they were. Brandon was charming, attentive, funny in the way that made everyone in the room lean toward him. He had this laugh that filled up a whole restaurant. I loved that laugh. The first year was fine. Better than fine. It was good. We cooked dinner together on Sundays. We went to his friend's lake house in the summer. He remembered small things. My coffee order, the name of my college roommate, which side of the bed I preferred. The second year, he got a promotion. And something shifted, quiet at first, like a door slowly swinging closed in a room you're not even in yet. He started working later. He stopped asking about my day. He stopped laughing at my jokes. The small ones. The ones that were only funny to us. He became a man who was always slightly somewhere else, even when he was standing right in front of me. I told myself it was the job, the stress, the adjustment. I was patient. I was understanding. I was everything my mother taught me a good wife should be. Year 3, I found a message on his phone. I wasn't snooping. I was trying to turn off his alarm because he'd left for the gym and it was going off at 5:45 in the morning. And I was half asleep and just trying to make it stop. And there it was, a thread with a name I didn't recognize. Short messages, but the kind of short that means the long parts happened somewhere else, somewhere I couldn't see. I put the phone down. I stood in the middle of our bedroom in the gray early morning light and I thought, what do I do now? What I did was nothing. I told myself it was probably nothing. I talked myself out of what I had seen with my own eyes because the alternative, that it was something, required a version of me that was ready to act, and I wasn't. Not yet. That's the part no one tells you about. The paralysis. Everyone wants to believe they'd walk out immediately, that they'd flip the table and pack a bag and leave. But when you're in it, when your whole life is tangled up with another person's, when your name is on a mortgage and your friends are his friends, and your routines and your holidays and your sense of safety are all wrapped up in this one person, leaving is not a switch you flip. It's a mountain you have to decide to climb, and I wasn't ready to climb it. So I stayed, and I watched, and I began, very quietly, very slowly, to prepare. I went back to school. That was the first thing. I had a communications degree that I'd never done much with. I'd taken a marketing coordinator job to help us save for the down payment on the house, and then somehow 3 years passed and I was still there, underpaid and unchallenged. I enrolled in a graduate program in the evenings. Brandon thought it was cute. That was the word he used. Cute, like I was taking a pottery class, like it wasn't a plan. I got a new savings account, just mine. I deposited a small amount every month, regular enough that it didn't show up as unusual in our finances, not so regular that he'd think it was purposeful. I started building something that belonged only to me. Year 4, I stopped confronting him about the late nights. Not because I stopped noticing. I noticed everything. but because every time I brought it up, I ended up apologizing by the end of the conversation. He had a way of doing that, of turning my reasonable concerns into evidence of my own insecurity. "You're paranoid. You've always been anxious. I'm trying to build a career for us and you're making me feel like a criminal." So I stopped bringing it up. I stopped giving him the chance to reframe what I knew. I started keeping a journal instead. Dates, times, things he said. Not because I thought I'd need it, just because writing things down made them real in a way that living inside my own head couldn't anymore. Year 5, I finished my degree. I told Brandon at dinner and he nodded and said nice and went back to his phone. I sat across from him and I thought, this is the last birthday I'm going to spend wondering if you're texting her under the table. I didn't say it. I just thought it. And then I refilled my wine glass and started thinking about the next step. The next step was talking to a lawyer. Her name was Sandra, and she was referred to me by a woman I'd met in one of my graduate classes whose own divorce had been, as she described it, surgical. Sandra was precise, calm, and thorough. She explained everything. She told me what I was entitled to, what I'd have to prove, what documents I should start gathering quietly. I gathered them. Slowly, carefully, over the next 14 months. Bank statements, investment records, the records from a business account I'd found that wasn't linked to our joint finances. I didn't touch any of it. I just documented. By the time Brandon slid those papers across the kitchen table, I had been ready for 8 months. He just didn't know that. The papers he gave me were a first draft. His version of how things should go. He had written in terms that seemed reasonable on the surface but were designed, Sandra had warned me, to obscure certain assets. The business he'd started 2 years earlier with a friend of his, the one he'd described to me as basically a hobby, was worth considerably more than he'd let on. He thought I didn't know. I knew. After that night, things moved quickly. Or rather, I moved quickly, and Brandon was stunned by the pace of it. He'd handed me those papers expecting a negotiation, expecting me to come to the table scared and grateful for whatever terms he offered. Instead, I had my own papers ready within 10 days. He called me while I was at work. "What is this?" he said. "My response," I said. "Sandra will explain the details if you have questions." Silence on the other end. "Then you already had a lawyer." "I've had a lawyer for a while," I said. "And then, because I am only human, did you think I was just folding laundry all those years?" He hung up. What followed were 3 months of back and forth, of meetings I didn't attend because Sandra attended them for me, of documents and counter-proposals and moments where I had to sit on my bathroom floor at midnight and remind myself that I was going to be fine, that I had chosen this, that the fear I was feeling was the fear of change, not the fear of a mistake. I want to be honest about that part because people skip over it in the telling. The ending sounds clean and triumphant. The middle is not clean. The middle is lying awake at 2 in the morning, wondering if you made the right call. If you should have tried harder, if your whole life is about to unravel. The middle is calling your sister and crying so hard you can't get words out. The middle is carrying your grief and your determination in the same 2 hands and trying not to drop either one. My sister Becca was the only person who knew everything, not just the divorce, the whole of it. The message on his phone in year 3, the savings account. Sandra, the business records. She had known for 2 years and said nothing to anyone, not even our mother, because I had asked her not to. Becca is 4 years older than me. Practical in the way that only people who've survived their own hard things can be. And the night I called her after Brandon gave me the papers, she said, "Finally, I've had a bag packed for you in my spare room for a year and a half." I moved in with her on a Thursday in March. I left a house I'd loved, a neighborhood I'd known for 6 years, a kitchen where I'd cooked thousands of dinners. I took my clothes, my grandmother's ring, my journals, and my laptop. Everything else could be sorted later. Brandon tried, in those first weeks, to make things messy. He called my mother. That one stung. I won't pretend it didn't. He painted a version of events where I had given up on the marriage, where he was blindsided, where everything was mutual and civilized until I turned hostile. My mother called me, confused and upset, and I sat with her for 3 hours and told her everything, not a condensed version. Everything. She was quiet for a long time after. And then she said, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I needed to handle it myself first," I said. "I needed to know I could." She reached across the table and took my hand, and that was that. the business records were the turning point. When Sandra presented them in the formal settlement discussion, Brandon's lawyer went very quiet for a moment in a way that told me everything I needed to know about how much his client had told him. There was a brief recess. When they came back, the tone had shifted entirely. We settled 3 weeks later. I'm not going to state the exact figures, that's between me and the court documents, but I will say that the terms were nothing like the first set of papers he had slid across my kitchen table. The hobby business was factored in. The investment accounts were factored in. The 7 years of contribution to a household that allowed his career to grow while mine waited were factored in. He signed on a Wednesday morning. I was at work when Sandra called. I excused myself to the stairwell and she said, "It's done." And I said, "Thank you." And then I sat on a concrete step in a fluorescent-lit stairwell and cried in a way I hadn't let myself cry in years. Not grief, exactly. More like release. Like something I'd been holding with both hands for so long I'd forgotten it'd wait. I called Becca. She said, "Dinner tonight. Anywhere you want." I chose the Italian place we'd gone to every birthday since we were kids, the one with the red checkered tablecloths that were deeply unfashionable and completely wonderful. We split a bottle of wine and a tiramisu and talked until they started stacking chairs around us. There are things I know now that I didn't know at 26. I know that staying in something broken isn't loyalty. It can look like loyalty from the outside and it can feel like loyalty from the outside. And it can feel like loyalty from the inside, but it isn't. Loyalty is built on something mutual. What I was doing was maintenance. Maintaining the shape of something that had already stopped existing because the alternative scared me. I know that preparing for yourself is not betrayal. In those last 2 years, I sometimes felt guilty about it. The savings account, the lawyer, the documentation. Like I was being sneaky, underhanded, not giving the marriage a fair chance. But a fair chance requires 2 people. I had already given the marriage every chance I had. What I was doing in those final years wasn't sabotage. It was survival. I know that the moment you stop being afraid of losing something is the moment you realize you've already been grieving it for a long time. The night Brandon handed me those papers, I wasn't scared. I'd already done the scary part. I'd already lost him in every way that mattered, years before either of us said the word out loud. And I know this is the one that took me the longest, that there is a version of you that exists on the other side of the hardest thing you've ever done. She's not the same person you were before. She's quieter in some ways, louder in others. She takes up space differently. She doesn't fold other people's shirts anymore, not unless she wants to. I'm in a new apartment now. It has big windows that face east, so I get the morning light through the kitchen while I make coffee. I have a job I actually like, that uses the degree I finished while my husband called it cute. I talk to Becca 2 or 3 times a week. My mother comes over for dinner on Sundays sometimes, and she sits at my table in my apartment and looks at me with this expression I didn't quite understand at first. It took me a few months to recognize it as relief. She had been watching me disappear too. She just hadn't known how to say it. Brandon and I don't have contact now, and that's fine. There's nothing left to say. I don't hate him. I spent a lot of time worried I'd have to, that anger would be the only way through. But I don't. I feel something closer to indifference, with a small thread of sadness for the people we were when we were 24 and 26 and standing in a rented hall while our mothers cried. Those people meant it. It just didn't last. What lasted is me. A few weeks ago, I found one of the journals I kept during those middle years. I opened it and read an entry from year 4, during one of the harder stretches, a night I'd clearly been close to just giving in and accepting things as they were. The handwriting was shaky. The last line of the entry said, "I just need to know there's something worth going toward, not running from, going toward." I closed the journal. I looked out my east-facing windows. The light was coming in the way it does in the morning, low and golden and completely ordinary, and somehow always a little surprising. Like even after everything, it still shows up. I thought, there it is. People always want the story to start at the ending. They want the moment Ivy stood up, signed the papers, walked away clean. They want the east-facing windows and the morning light in the Italian restaurant with the red checkered tablecloths. And I understand that the ending is the part that feels good to hear. But the ending didn't come from nowhere. It came from every quiet decision made in the years before anyone was watching. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the settlement, Not the moment Brandon's lawyer went silent when the real numbers landed on the table. What I keep thinking about is the night in year 3 when I put his phone down, stood in the gray early morning light, and chose, slowly, imperfectly, not all at once, to stop abandoning myself. There's something that happens when you make small, honest choices over a long period of time. They accumulate: a savings account, an enrollment form, an appointment with a lawyer, a journal entry at 2 in the morning when you're not sure you're strong enough but you write it down anyway. None of those things feel like power in the moment. They feel like survival. But survival, done with intention, over enough time, becomes something else entirely. Brandon made choices too. That's the other side of it. Every time he dismissed her goals as cute, every time he rewrote her reasonable concerns into evidence of her own anxiety, every time he hid what he was doing because he assumed she was too trusting or too tired or too small to find it, those choices built something as well, just not what he intended. This is what I've come to believe. The life you end up with is largely assembled from the choices you make when no one is giving you credit for making them. Ivy didn't get a reward for going back to school while her husband wasn't paying attention. No one applauded the savings account. Becca knew, but Becca kept it quiet, because this was Ivy's to carry until she was ready. The discipline of those years, the patience, the documentation, the refusal to act out of fear before she was prepared, that was the real work. The settlement was just the receipt. Integrity, I think, is what you do with the truth once you know it. Not immediately, not dramatically, but steadily. Ivy knew what she knew in year 3. She didn't perform outrage she wasn't ready to act on. She let the truth inform her quietly, over time, until she had built something solid enough to stand on. That's not weakness. That's a particular kind of intelligence that doesn't get talked about enough. The intelligence of timing, of restraint, of knowing the difference between patience and paralysis and choosing the former deliberately. And then there's this. She asked Becca for silence, not rescue. She didn't outsource her own becoming. When the moment finally came, the laundry, the papers, the word okay, she met it herself. That's the thing about doing the work over years rather than weeks. By the time the hardest moment arrives, you've already lived through 100 smaller versions of it. You've already practiced being the person who doesn't fold. The light still comes through those east-facing windows every morning. She still makes coffee in a kitchen that belongs to her. That didn't happen to her. She built it, quietly, while someone else assumed she wasn't paying attention.